Filthy Tom Lawlor at Major League Wrestling. Big Miami debut, Scottish Rite Temple. Tom, what are your thoughts of just transitioning from the MMA into the pro wrestling, and how you've taken to it? Because you've been doing pretty well with it.
Yeah, well, it was actually, there's been multiple transitions back and forth over the course of the years. My first foray into MMA, my first MMA fight was 2003, and then I think I had my pro wrestling debut in 2005 or 2006. Then I went back to MMA, and now here I am back wrestling. So it's been quite a journey, but this current go-round in the ring is completely, separate from the first time. I was a lot younger then, a lot different situation in life, a lot more unsure of what the future held. Now, being back here in the pro wrestling world and being involved with Major League Wrestling and other companies, it's really helped me find myself over the past few years as a wrestler and an athlete and a performer and everything that entails. So it's been fun, it's been tough at times. There's a lot of, the physical aspect is one thing, but trying to draw a connection with the fans and trying to relate to the people that are out there, whether you're trying to get them on your side or whether you're trying to get them to hate you. Those are two very tough things to do. You don't really have to do that in the sporting world, so I've kind of had to adjust a little bit, and I think I've done a pretty good job over that.
Well, Tom, you mentioned, even starting back then, the culture has changed, the mindset has changed about how people and fans react to MMA, how people and fans react to pro wrestling. So this time around, do you feel like you're being more accepted by fans, or no, or that's not a situation?
I think fans understand now. They understand MMA more, and they understand the techniques, obviously, because they've been around, they've been ingrained. If you remember back in the 80s and early 90s in wrestling, you didn't tap out, you said uncle, you actually verbally submitted. Now, years later, it's the tap out that's the signal to end the match. So we've seen a kind of a shift, not only in if you're talking about work-wise, but also a shift in the way that the fans view things. And they're a lot more open now, I think, to MMA techniques. MMA stars themselves aren't always heavyweights, so I think the wrestling fans are a little bit more accepting of different sizes, different body types now, as opposed to how they were before.
Do you feel like there are more MMA fighters now getting involved in pro wrestling than back? I remember this going back before then, with Dan Severn, Dan the Beast Severn, Ken Shamrock. So I know there have been some.
Yeah.
But do you feel like we're seeing a time now where more MMA fighters are starting to get involved in pro wrestling?
Yeah, and if you look over the course of history, really, in the U.S. it's kind of fragmented, but if you look at pro wrestling and MMA as two separate entities, they've also been relatively intertwined, with people going back and forth between them. And if you do the research and you do the history and you take a look at everything that's happened in the past, you'll see that they are basically branches from the same tree. Not two roots growing on their own. So there's always been, intermingling between the two subsets. Dan Severn, Ken Shamrock, very notable guys that did pro wrestling. Well, Don Fry, one of their contemporaries, was fighting in Japan. He was pro wrestling in Japan. And there was a number of other guys that were doing the same thing as he was, whether it was in Pride, whether it was in Pancrase, whether it was in the 90s or 2005. New Japan Pro Wrestling was throwing some of their top guys into shoot fights, and it wasn't working out too well for some of them, and some of them it worked out okay. Like Nakamura did pretty well. So I think people forget that there are a ton of wrestlers that have legit backgrounds, or that have amateur wrestling backgrounds, or they have submission fighting backgrounds. Kushida, another guy from New Japan, was a great MMA fighter, undefeated MMA fighter, won basically a tournament for up-and-comers and then decided to go into wrestling. So there's always going to be, obviously, wrestlers and fighters that go back and forth between the two of them. So I don't really think it's any more so now
than it was
before. I think people are just more aware of it because they're more aware of MMA, they're more aware of UFC, they're more aware of it worldwide. And also news just travels faster, so everything's more readily available. There's more wrestling schools, there's more ways to access the business. So as a percentage, probably not, but I guess maybe overall numbers wise, yeah, maybe there's more MMA guys now, but I just view them the same. So.
Tom, what do you enjoy about pro wrestling?
What don't I enjoy about it, really? Everything that goes on in the ring, in front of the fans, backstage, all that stuff is great. It allows you to not only, you can develop a personality, you can be yourself, but you can be a little bit more than you want to be in some cases. You can amplify it. And, that's one of the things that when you get out there in front of the crowd, it's tough to do in front of just a room of, an empty room. You can't play that character. You can't put yourself into that role until you're out there in front of the people doing it. And honestly, there's no feeling like stepping through the curtain, whether it's an MMA fight, whether it's a pro wrestling match. When you walk through that curtain and you hear the crowd pop, you hear the crowd, cheer for you. It gives you a sense of adrenaline that, I can't really put into words. It's you get a rush, you get goosebumps. It's mind tingling, but it's also one of the best feelings in the world.
And MLW, and you can see Filthy Tom Lawlor, 8 p.m. Fridays, beIN Sports. Tom, how did you get the nickname Filthy? I'm sure everybody asks that.
It always comes up, and I really don't have a very good answer. I'm just generally unkempt, dirty.
Is that really?
Yeah. I mean, I've got piles of laundry at home. I don't know.
Because in baseball, when they say someone's filthy, that's like high praise in baseball.
Well, I know
that picture was filthy. His stuff is filthy.
Yeah, some people use it as that term. And okay, I'll accept that as being the meaning of the word.
Hey, you're getting good reviews. You're getting good reviews. So. Oh, it's not true. You're getting good reviews, so I could take it like, yeah, that's it.
Filthy technique. So.